So now that it's dry, it might be a little bit easier for you guys just to come in and float a little tiny bit of that gray by itself and floating medium only. Okay, so you can get that little bit of a line back up, test it to see, make sure that you guys are getting a nice little line. Add a little bit more floating medium if you need it to dilute it, and that'll help push it right up. Okay, so you just want to be able to create that line. Okay, so anywhere that you feel like it wasn't dark enough, you can always go and intensify it a little bit. If you had too much white in your gradient, you can always go back and fix things a little bit just with a bit of gray. Okay, and then where I want to add the gray to is under. So you want to do that shading on both sides of your little brick edge here. Okay, so you can go ahead and do that. And then, excuse me, if you don't feel dark enough, okay, to save some time, we're going to add a little tiny bit of black or licorice, whatever you have. And come in and just hit it just a tiny, tiny little bit, just enough so you're darkening that gray. Okay, so you can add gray and black to it to create just a little darker charcoal kind of color. All right, so I've got enough here over here in my little mixture with some floating medium that I can probably come back here a few times and just pick up more paint as I need it. Okay, and then right here at the bottom, at the very, very back, I'm going to do a straight line all the way around, and that's going to help intensify that back wall of the floor. Okay, and then we're going to come around and do some extra shading all around our cart. Okay, straight line here and underneath our wheels. Okay, so we have that little bit of a darkness, and you don't want like a hard line, especially under here. You want it a lot more darker. So you're just going to go flip-flap back here and move that down a little bit so that you have a little bit more shading underneath where your wheels are going to be. Okay, and then you can even, right underneath where your wheels are, just put that little bit of a straight line. Make sure it's straight, just like wispy here and there. Because you're going to get a little bit of shading underneath your wheels after too. Okay, and I don't have enough coverage of whatever I had here. I'm just going to flip-flop around, add some white in there, just to cover that yucky area. Okay, I need a little bit more coverage with. Make it a little bit mottled, flip-flop around. I'm just going to clean my brush quickly because I added white into it. Okay. And then just keep working your way all around the back of things. And get that in there. And again, all in the corner. Okay. That's going to help make that look a lot further away. On the underside. If you just use all black, it'll be too harsh, right? So you just want to have those different tones of gray, more charcoal look. Okay, run out and make more. Add some more floating medium. Just that small amount of black will really take over. Try not to go too dark. So this is where we can start doing our little lines, and where we want to do is a little bit of a soft square, so you don't want it to be too hard. Okay, I have a lot of paint in my brush. I gotta knock some out. Okay. I'm going to do one side, let it all dry, and then you come around and do the other side is the easiest thing to do. Okay, so again, if you want this a little bit darker, you can go around your edges. A little bit on the back side of things. And I always found trying to do one side is easier and then come back. Okay, and then we need some shading back and under here too, I forgot. Okay, just along the back side and then come straight down on your line. And I'm going to come underneath. And then this is what we're going to do on both sides, is we're going to do shading on both sides. Right, so you can flip around and start doing your shading over on this side if you want. And then you definitely want to intensify your shading on the outside, on the inside of your door. Okay, add a little bit more floating medium. Okay, so you just kind of make your wobbly little door. Doesn't have to be totally straight, guys, because remember, this is all like stonework and done a long, long time ago. Okay, so I'm gonna, oops, this is too high. It was still wet, so I was able to rinse it out. Okay, so this one goes right here. Got too much glare on my lighting here today. Okay, and then on both sides. Okay, you won't really see that. Okay. A little bit more shading there. We can put just a bit of shading, more shading back here at the door entrance. And I'm going to put a tree there, so don't worry, we're going to put other things, right? If you have a little bit of a dirty spot, the brown will cover all this here too as well. Okay, and again, this little area here is more worked on, so if it's not, you know, flip-flopped enough for you, a little bit dirty spots there, just flip-flop a little bit more darkness here, looking like in the path here. Okay, I'm going to add to that as well. Okay. Definitely darker back there. And so usually in the middle of our doorstep is usually where the bricks come in again. So we can put a line about there. Okay. Let this dry if you feel like you're hitting it. Okay, but basically we're going to do reverse shading, so both ways. So this one's going to come this way, and then this one's going to come this way. Okay, but sometimes you keep hitting some areas, so this is why I was saying just do one side at a time. And then that way, it's straight here, but soft, like a scoval, I call it. Okay, and then we can just intensify that corner. Nothing's, depends on where you put your little tree here. Okay, doing both sides. A little tiny bit there. And then we'll put half here. Okay, because they're further away, they can be closer together. Here they look bigger because they're coming closer towards you. Okay, so we can always put one back here and then one back here, so they're not totally straight. Like, they don't have to be totally half, right? Too much paint. Rinse my brush so I can fix my gradient. When it takes over for you and it's not giving you what you're looking for, sometimes we have to scratch that and start over. My gradient, my brush got way too dirty on the other side. Okay, so we definitely got to move back. Just kind of skimping it over. And just use your fingers to kind of smooth things out too, because you want it to look a little bit stony, right? And I find the more you try, sometimes it's easier just to let it go and then just kind of use your finger to smooth things out a little bit. Okay, leaving that light in the middle. And I'm going to come over here now that it's dry. And that's we do the other sides. Okay, and make sure you have the shading coming underneath. Just a little bit here. Like I said, it doesn't have to join, just kind of like softly goes in, disappears. And sometimes it's actually nice to have a little bit of a drier, skimpy look because it makes it look more like stonework. But you don't want to see that canvas kind of little bump. So this is where I was trying to make sure that my canvas was really nice and smooth. So you can always put a little bit of shading underneath here to get it going. And where we want it dark in here too is right here and behind the lip. But we're going to add to that as well. Add that little line in there. Okay. And then now we can go back to adding white into our brush again. And if you feel like it's a little bit easier, I've been working with a number 8. And for the cart, definitely upsize your brush. It'll be a little bit quicker to maybe a 12. Okay. And then we're going to side load and pick up some gray. Okay, so we only want a very, very little bit of a gradient of the gray and mostly like 80% white, okay guys? So almost the same technique that we were doing with the floating medium only. We're going to add white in there, so it's going to add that little bit more coverage. Okay, and do some shading at the same time. Now that it's all nice and base coated, so it's going to be a lot easier to get that coverage in there. And that white in your brush now is just going to help give you a little bit more of a softer look. Right, pushing that white in there just to make it look further away. And keep adding white. Okay, because you don't want it too dark. Okay. And I'm going to come straight here in front of my box. Keep playing with it. So I'm trying to get a modeled look too. This doesn't have to be totally neat. All the way around the back. Good practice for you guys. Like I said, a lot of this won't be seen, but if little peeks of it does, then you're covered, right? And then all the way to the front. Yeah, so there's also a little bit of a line here. Like I said, you don't see it in the finished result. I'm going to show you again. You don't see it, guys. It's just to help you with placement. Okay, see that back line inside of the box there? Oops, wrong one. Okay, so that was just more for me when I was drawing it and to try to make sure that it looked like a box and proportions and stuff like that. But we really don't need to worry about that extra shading in there. Okay. And then come around all around the back. So yeah, hopefully you've added some shading to this guy here. Okay, just because he's back there. Feeling a little bit dry. You just want it to be like a very soft gray-white. Okay, not too dark at all. Okay, so you have a nice thin line there. Okay, so if you practice in the back first and then work your way to the front, then hopefully you're feeling a little bit more comfortable to get that really nice little fine line of gray coming up there. Okay, so I'm just trying to, oops, add more softness here. Could be a dirty white. But right here, I'm just kind of using the back of my brush, guys, and I'm just trying to flip-flop some really nice bright white in there. So I get a little better coverage from my canvas. Yucky colors showing through. Okay, so if yours is looking nice and bright and white, then you don't have to worry too much about that. Okay, so it's just to get things going. And we are going to add just a touch of shading back in underneath that as well. There's it good. Angle your brush a little bit, flip it so you get just the edge. And erase. I don't worry too much. I like erasing, I think. You know, sometimes I think I just don't worry about it too much because you know you can always go in and erase. Okay, so again, we want that double line here and a double line here. Okay. It's easier for you to do one side, let it dry. Okay, a little bit of dirty white gray look that'll be underneath our stripe, just subtle. Okay, you can always add more of those if you feel like you need them. Okay. Clean that up. Upside down. And my dark is at the bottom. A little bit at the back. Okay, so hopefully your shading behind and the back will be darker than the shading of gray that's around your cart. Okay, so we're only using gray only on the cart, where we added the black on the ground coverage. So then hopefully that will look darker for you. Okay, if you feel like it's not dark enough, that's when you can add just a little bit of black with some floating medium. Okay, it's that white out. And you can always go in with that little dark mixture. Okay, and then come in behind it so that your ground is actually darker. Okay, and then work your way out, guys, too, so then that way you're got a little soft edge there. And like I said, a lot of that plant is going to be hiding this, but so this is a good spot to practice. Okay, getting that little bit darker edge there. Just a clean brush and floating medium. I got a bit of white showing through here. Okay, so I'm just trying to rinse that away. Find a clean spot here. Especially back here where you want it to be the darkest. So now, this is where we need to add a little bit of burnt umber or true brown. Burnt umber is definitely a little bit more warmer. But if you have only true brown, once you mix it with the yellow ochre, it's going to definitely give you a little bit more of a warmer color. Okay, so we want to have that same sort of technique that we were doing with the whites and the grays. Okay, we're adding a little bit of that yellow ochre. I'm going to add just a little bit of white to lighten it up. Just a little bit, I said. Okay, just a little bit. If you only put white in at once, that's all you need. Okay, guys? So then again, we're going to come over and we're going to push that gradient right up there, just like as if we were doing it with the floating medium. Okay, so you definitely could add a bit more wishy-washy yellow on one side and then nice strong brown on the other side. Okay, that's why I like doing some side loading sometimes when I'm doing this kind of a technique with a lot of floating medium on the other side. Okay, so this is where we're going to come in around and underneath all of our windowsill with that little bit of brown now. Just a subtle. Okay, flip-flop it around. And just to add that little extra shading now all around your windowsills and the outside of your door. We'll have lots of experience doing some of the shading techniques. That little bit of a dirty brown softness under there. And then where we're also going to add that too, guys, is underneath our canopy. Okay, so we want to have that little bit of shadow and darker look. And just flip-flop it around and add that little bit of darker color is fine. Okay, just bottle it out. A little bit more floating medium, too dark. And we can always fix that with our green and our colors later. Okay, so just having that little bit of darker color combination. You see how I flip-flop it around, so then I'm trying to get a little bit of that darker yellow ochre in there again. Flip-flop around just to kind of blend it in a little bit. And under. And this is where it really helps to define things. And under here, just a bit more, because you definitely wanted that little bit of a darkness look coming under here. And then we're going to define our wall. Okay, so again, we're going to do the two sides. One side, and fade it out. Okay, so I hardly have any yellow ochre in my brush. It's mostly floating medium and just enough to dirty it, guys. Okay, so you're doing like a bit of a wash. So that way, if you have any light areas that are mottled, that it shouldn't cover too much. Okay, and then you're going to come over on the other side and do the reverse shading on this side, so it softens that line back out. Bring it out a little bit. Don't want it to be like a hard line. You want it to be a shadow. Okay. Look at it straight up and down. See how you feel. Okay, so definitely I'm going to be putting a plant back here, so I want a little bit of shadow extra. Okay. Do both directions so they blend right into each other. And just enough some dirty spots on my wall. Loading medium. And then we're going to, easier to do it upside down. Start over behind your door and do that same reverse all the way around the outside. And see how that's all coming together now with that little extra shading. Okay, and then we're going to do all on top of this wall, all the bottom parts. And so this is where you can fix some areas, but I wasn't worried too much about here because I do believe this is going to be hidden. That's just so it carries through. Yeah, flip-flop it around, and a few little traces of darkness come through. That's fine. That just gives it like a little bit of a, dirty areas. It's old and weird, and we'll just feather it out a little bit. Too dark, then just add floating medium, and we'll thin it out. As long as you do it right away. Okay, and then we also want to add more shading on the top side. Okay, this is just really going to help define the, it's not like you usually get shading there, but it's just enough to define the canopy. Okay. And this should be covering the pencil marks, if there's any. Okay. Just subtle. You definitely want them to be heavier in the underneath. Okay, so this is just more defining kind of line. I may be doing things a little bit differently than last time. All right. So do a little bit more there, just getting all that extra in there done. Okay, so you can see a little bit more of the shadowing that I was doing underneath here now. Getting that all in there. What do you think, Bella?
It's awesome.
Is it a little easier than you guys thought, or you guys? I don't really talk to Bella. I got everybody's heads down painting. Shelly's not painting. Are you painting with me today? No, you're just watching too. Okay, I thought I seen you painting earlier. No, not today. Okay. So yeah, during the week, you guys send me, what you got going on so far too, like up to this point of, where we stopped tonight, and then make sure that you're feeling comfortable before we move on. And any practice that we're going to play around with, we're going to get some tiny brushes out and some cardstock, and we're going to play around and practice some of these little flowers. Okay, so it definitely would be a good idea to get that bright green out, or whatever color you want to make your little stripes with. Start getting that in there as well. And to get those tiny little lines, sometimes we do need to get down into our 6, all right, to get those stripes. Or an 8, as long as you got the width in there, or you can paint a little bit on an angle with your 8. Okay, to get those little stripes in there nice and thin. And sometimes when I want good coverage and base coating, I don't even dampen my brush. I just go right into the paint and get my brush really good and loaded. Okay, this was a clean brush that was already dry, not used. Okay, so you get a little bit better coverage. So again, sometimes I worry about just the one side of my line. Get that coverage in there. And then I'll flip my canvas upside down to get the other side. So just try not to have a big gloopy side where you need to blend. So if you have that little bit of an edge from the thick paint, you know, just make sure that it's on the outside of your line. Okay, and we are going to add to that and add some sap green to that. And there's always a chance that you're going to mess up and go over on your white side, so that's why I always do the white after, then that way I could fix anything I don't like. Okay, and then like I said, just have a clean brush and erase anything right away. And you won't have to fix so much that way. Okay. And I'm going to flip the canvas around to do the other side so it's easier for me. I always find I have to back up and work myself into it. Or start at your right-hand side and work to your left. I swear I'm dyslexic a little bit. Just keep at it and you can clean it up. Sometimes when I pick up my brush, even though it's got all one color on it, sometimes when I keep going to grab fresh paint, I'll actually still just load the corner of my brush, so then I have control on that edge where I have the thicker paint on one side of my brush than the other. And then that allows me to draw with it a little bit more, so I can have that little thickness there where I want it, and come all the way around to color it in. Flip it around. Clean up that other line. Okay, and then on the other side, we have a tiny little guy here. Yeah, I just use the manipulate the corner of my brush, guys. Okay. Maybe even with a little detailer if you want, color it in, or really use the number 2 if you feel like you want to. But like I said, I don't worry about the cleanup. If I go over my edge a little bit, I could always erase to get that line nice. Okay. And then underneath, there's two little tiny little stripes in there. Okay, so it's just very, very, very little subtle ones. Okay, and you're going to start in underneath that second line. Okay, a little bit coverage there. Okay, a little bit of a triangle. Okay, and then it's going to come in very, very narrow. Okay, so you might want to add a little bit of floating medium in there if it's not allowing you to come really nice and thin on your chisel, or come in with a smaller brush. And then float that little bit of a stripe right underneath there. And then the other one, you can make it a little bit smaller. Okay, so I usually do like a little tap movements to get that thicker edge. Nice clean line underneath the canvas. Okay, and then very, 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 very thin and disappear. And this is actually really easy. It's the second line to erase. If you feel like, you know, you have to erase, make sure you do the top one first. Make sure you're happy with it. Then move down to your bottom one. Okay, and then you can use this erasing trick to try to feather that out really thin underneath. Okay. And then our stripe here. I used my little brush that I'm going to use for pouncing. That's the problem. I don't have a nice straight edge on my chisel because of my brush is all fuzzy at the end. So see, this is what you have to do, Bor, if you don't have a nice chisel. You need to clean it up a little bit. But when I go and do my extra shading around the edges, then it does make a big difference if you have a nice chisel on your brush. Take your time. That straight line up, back. You light on the canvas, make sure you're not putting your elbow in wet paint somewhere else. And there's our stripes done. Okay, so I didn't add all the little extra detail shading into the canopy until a little bit later, I believe. I did start a little bit on there at this point. So, but you can always add that in a little bit later too. Okay, because I do want to add a little bit more to that with the poles. We can always add that a little bit later too. Okay, so I've got a bit of ink or something coming through here, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. Like I said, they're going to be full of pots, guys. Right? So you could do that. You can play around with just pencil and put your boxes in. Okay, so when you do a box, Yeah, I'm not sure how much you feel comfortable. It's a bit on an angle, this rectangle. Okay. And then you can come down on your edges. Just a little bit of an angle. Okay, just to get placement. All right, so we want to have 4 of these. Maybe one is going to be bigger than the other. So you can just start off by putting your little ovals. All right, and then you're going to come down with a little bit of a ledge on your little ovals, and then you're going to put your bottoms of your ceramic pots. Okay, and then we're just going to float in more flowers. Okay, so always play around and get those penciled in, but we won't put them in till next time. You can actually quickly put in whatever brown you have on your plate. Okay, we can start putting some brown into our door. And with this, I want to just add just a little bit of white in my brush just to kind of give it some light and dark areas. But the first thing I'm doing here, guys, is just putting all brown, just so that I can get all around the outside of that door all really dark. Okay, and then I did have to base coat my little sign back in with white. Okay, so as long as you have this good and dry, then we'll be able to do that as well. You can paint around it if you want to do a little bit of a drawing of a square on an angle. Paint around it, but I found it, it's very easy to kind of go over it with the white, and then we're going to paint other areas. And let it dry. Okay, and then you get good coverage here all around the edges. And then I'm going to add a little bit of white and some floating medium into this. And I'm just going to flip-flop that little lighter color of brown inside it now. Just with that little bit of a lighter brown. And whatever's left on your plate, and then we're going to add to this just enough to give it some base coat. Okay, and then you can add a little bit of Pablo in there if you want, a little bit more richer, more yellow ochre if you want to just put that tiny little bit of warmth in with the brown. And that white as well, that'll add some warmth to it. And then we're going to add some more to that as well. And that gives us pretty much everything base coated. Okay, so you see how it's a little bit darker around the edges. And then once that's dry, we can always add more darkness in areas as well. Okay, but I don't want it too much coverage right now. Okay. When this is dry, we'll be able to pencil our little stem, our little sign in.